Okay, so you want to hear this. All right. Just let me get through it before you start asking questions. I don't tell this one a lot. Not because I think people won't believe me. I mean, maybe they won't. That's whatever. It's more like every time I start telling it, I have to go back to that place in my head. And that place ain't somewhere I enjoy being. You know what I mean? It's like when you have a bad car accident. And for years after, every time you drive past that same intersection, you get this little jolt in your chest. Doesn't matter how much time's passed, some things just don't leave you. Anyway, yeah, the subway job. All right, so you gotta understand where I was at when this happened. This was, I want to say, maybe 3.5 years ago now. I was coming off about 4 months of just getting my ass handed to me, financially speaking. I'd been doing HVAC installation with Ronnie Carver's crew. You remember me talking about Ronnie. Big guy. Always had that same Steelers cap on anyway. That job dried up. Just dried up. They lost the contract on 2 commercial builds back to back, and Ronnie had to let 4 of us go, and I was one of the 4. No hard feelings, just the way it goes. But the way it goes doesn't pay your rent. You know what I'm saying. So I'm out of work, and I've got about 6 weeks of savings if I'm careful. Maybe 8 if I stop eating like a normal human being. I was renting this 1-bedroom over on Clement back then. Nothing fancy. Radiator that made noise all night. Neighbor upstairs who walked heavy and kept what I think was a schedule of specifically waking up at 3 in the morning and dragging furniture around. Place smelled like old carpet and someone else's cooking. But it was mine. Had my name on the lease and everything. And I was not trying to lose it. I picked up some day work here and there, helped a guy move, did some painting for this woman on Edgewood who kept changing her mind about the color, and I ended up doing the same bedroom 3 times. Got a few shifts at a warehouse out near the port, doing overnight receiving, but that was just a 1-week fill-in. And then they didn't call me back. I was on every job app you can think of. Indeed, ZipRecruiter, Craigslist, which I know sounds desperate, but you get desperate. I was checking my phone like every 20 minutes, like something was gonna change in the last 20 minutes. My buddy Marcus, not you, man. Marcus Teller, you don't know him. He texts me one afternoon and says, "Hey, transit authorities hiring night maintenance and platform staff for one of the downtown stations." Says he saw it posted somewhere. I looked it up and yeah, there it was. Nighttime facilities and platform operations attendant or something like that. Fancy title for, honestly, I wasn't totally sure what it was when I applied, which is kind of embarrassing to say. The listing was kind of vague. Said something about platform oversight, light maintenance duties, ensuring operational readiness for morning service. I figured it was cleaning, maybe some basic upkeep stuff, make sure nobody's sleeping on the benches, that kind of thing. The pay was $17.50 an hour, which at the time felt pretty good. Better than the warehouse job. And it was overnight, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., which I was used to by then. Night shifts don't bother me. Never really have. I applied on a Tuesday, got a call that Thursday, had the interview the following Monday. That was fast. That should have maybe told me something, but I wasn't in a position to read signs. I was in a position to make rent. The interview was at the Transit Authority offices, not at the station itself. Conference room, water cooler. Those chairs that are supposed to be ergonomic but aren't quite right. There were 2 people across from me. One was a woman named Patricia, HR I think. She did most of the talking. The other one was the supervisor I'd actually be working under. His name was Delgado. Raymond Delgado. I want to be specific about that because Delgado matters to this story. He just sat there the whole interview with his hands folded on the table, barely talked. Maybe said 6 sentences total. Answered his phone once and left the room for 2 minutes, and came back and sat back down without saying anything about it. Patricia asked all the standard questions. Why do you want to work here? Describe a time you handled a stressful situation at work. Are you comfortable with overnight hours? That stuff? I answered everything fine. I was good at interviews by that point. I'd had a lot of practice. At the end, Patricia asked if I had any questions, and I asked about the duties, just to get specific. She smiled, said Raymond could speak to that better than she could. And Delgado unfolded his hands and said, and I remember this pretty much word for word because of how he said it, flat and straightforward like he was reading off a list, even though he wasn't looking at anything. Platform monitoring, passenger assistance during final service hours, station lockdown procedures after last train departure, light maintenance checks, facility documentation. I said that sounded fine. He nodded, looked at me for a second, like he was deciding something. Then he said, "You'll want to read the operational handbook thoroughly. We take procedures seriously at this station." I said, "Sure, no problem." I was thinking like, yeah, Transit's probably got some union rules and liability stuff. Makes sense they'd have procedures. I started the following Wednesday. Now let me tell you about the station, because this matters. It's called Delworth Street. You probably know it. It's on the Blue Line, downtown adjacent. Not the busiest stop, but not nothing either. During the day, it's fine. Normal. Got the tile walls, that particular shade of yellowy white that every subway station in every city seems to have. The fluorescent lighting that hums at this frequency that you don't notice for the first hour. And then you can't stop noticing. 2 platforms, north and southbound, connected by a pedestrian tunnel underneath. Single mezzanine level up top, with the fare gates, and a token booth that was technically still staffed during peak hours. But by the time I came in for my shift, it had been empty for hours. Escalators on the north end, stairs on the south, one elevator that worked maybe 60% of the time. The station had this specific smell. I know that sounds like a weird thing to focus on, but if you've spent any real time in subway stations, you know they all have their own smell. Delworth smelled like concrete and old metal, and something underneath that. Something that I can only describe as wet paper. Like a box of old newspapers that got rained on once a long time ago, and then dried out, but never really lost it. You stopped noticing it after a while. But the first few nights, it was the first thing I thought about walking down those stairs. My shift started at 11. Last passenger train through Delworth on weeknights was the 142 southbound. After that, no more service until the 5:15 a.m. That's the gap. That 3.5, almost 4-hour window where the station's locked to the public and it's just whatever's in there, which was supposed to be just me. And sometimes, not always, there'd be a maintenance train that came through. Not a passenger train, just a work train. The kind that does track inspection or pulls equipment. Those didn't stop. They just moved through slow with their orange hazard lights going, and then they were gone. I think I saw one of those maybe 4 times the whole time I worked there. The lockdown procedure was exactly what it sounded like. After the 142 came through and the last passengers cleared the platform, I'd do a sweep of both platforms and the tunnel, make sure nobody was left. Then I'd go up to the mezzanine and lock the main entrance gates. There was a specific sequence for that. Which locks first, which way you turn the key. You had to log the time in this paper logbook that sat on the token booth counter. Then I'd check the emergency exits on both ends, not lock them. They can't be locked from inside because of fire code, but check that the door mechanisms were clear and log that too. Then I'd do what the handbook called a routine facility assessment, which basically meant walking the whole station, both levels, noting anything that needed attention. A light out, a wet spot on the floor, graffiti, damage to equipment. You write it in the log with the time and your initials. Then you could sit. The break room was just off the mezzanine. Little room with a table, a microwave, a mini fridge, and a folding chair that someone had duct-taped the back to. There was a closed-circuit monitor in there too. Showed the platform cameras, 4 feeds total. The handbook. Okay. So Delgado gave it to me my first night. Just handed it to me when I showed up. Said, read this before you do anything else. It was a 3-ring binder. White Transit Authority logo on the front. Looked like it had been photocopied a few times. Probably 60, 70 pages. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect. Workplace safety guidelines, how to handle a passenger medical situation, what to do if you find a bag left behind, how to report equipment failures, emergency evacuation routes. I read the whole thing that first night because I take that kind of thing seriously, and also because the first few hours of the shift were genuinely pretty quiet, and I needed something to do. The last section of the binder was titled Overnight Operational Protocols, specific to Delworth Street Station, and it was about 12 pages. Most of it was the lockdown procedure I already described, spelled out in more detail. But there were a few things in there that I thought were a little odd. Not crazy odd, just specific in a way that felt like more than just legal, cover-your-ass language. One said, in the event the 142 departure is delayed for any reason, platform personnel should not approach the train while it remains at the station. Contact your supervisor immediately via the station intercom or direct number provided. Okay. Fine. Makes sense from a safety standpoint, I guess. Don't go up to the train if something's off. Let somebody with more authority handle it. Another one said, documentation of the 142 departure must include confirmation of full train clearance. Do not log departure until the platform has been visually verified as clear. Also fine. Pretty standard. But then there was one, toward the end of the section, that I read twice because I wasn't totally sure I was reading it right. It said, should platform monitoring equipment indicate activity on either platform after confirmed lockdown, personnel are to remain in the operations room and continue documentation duties. Under no circumstances should personnel return to the platform to investigate monitoring anomalies during the post-lockdown window. Anomalies should be logged and reported to supervisor at shift end. I remember thinking, okay, that's a weird one, because that's basically saying, if the cameras show something, don't go look, just write it down. Which is the opposite of what I'd expect. Usually these jobs, if something weird pops up on a camera, you go check it out, right? That's kind of the whole point, but I figured there was probably some liability reason. Maybe they'd had incidents in the past where staff got hurt going to investigate something that turned out to be nothing. A rat, a shadow, whatever. So I filed it away and kept reading. I finished the binder around 12:30 that first night, sat back in the folding chair, looked at the camera feeds on the monitor. 4 gray images, empty platforms, the hum of the fluorescents doing their thing. I ate the sandwich I'd brought, checked my phone. My sister had texted asking if I could cover a little on Mom's phone bill that month, and I stared at that text for a while before putting my phone face down on the table. The 142 came through right on time. I watched it on the southbound platform camera, watched the doors open, watched the 3 people still riding at that hour get off and head upstairs, watched the doors close, watched the train go. I went down and did my sweep like the handbook said. Both platforms empty, tunnel empty. Logged the departure at 1:43, went back up and locked the gates, and logged that. Checked the emergency exits, logged those. Did the facility walk. Noted a flickering light on the northbound platform, 3rd fixture from the south end. Logged it, went back to the break room. And that was the job. That first night. That was literally just the job. But I remember sitting there afterward, sometime around 3 in the morning, eating the second half of my sandwich and staring at those 4 camera feeds and feeling something I couldn't quite name. Not scared. Not really. More like aware. It just felt like I wasn't the only thing awake down there. Which I know sounds stupid. It's a building. It's concrete and tile and metal and nothing else. But I noticed the flickering light on camera 2, the northbound platform. And the thing was, I'd already logged it, noted it as maintenance required, but it was still flickering. And in between flickers, in those half-second blackouts when the fluorescent died and came back, there was this moment, just this fraction of a second, where the platform looked different. Just slightly, like something about it was off. The shadows were wrong, or the frame was wrong, or I don't know. I kept watching, and it kept flickering, and I kept thinking I was seeing something that wasn't there, and eventually I convinced myself I was tired, and I looked away. I told myself it was just the light. Old building, old wiring. These things happen. I went home at 7 a.m., slept until 3, came back at 11. I did that for about 2.5 weeks before things started getting weird. The second week, I started noticing the 142 was never exactly on time. Not late enough to matter, not late enough to call anything. Like a minute, maybe 90 seconds sometimes. You wouldn't think twice about that on a subway. Trains run late. That's just what trains do. But here's the thing. And this took me a while to actually clock, because it's such a small thing. It was always late by almost exactly the same amount. Never 2 minutes. Never 30 seconds. Always somewhere in that 1 to 90-second window. Every single night. I don't know why that bothered me. I mentioned it to Delgado when he came by for what I guess you'd call a check-in. Happened once a week. He'd show up around midnight, walk the station with me, look at my logs. Not a lot. Not say much. I told him I'd noticed the 142 was consistently running a little behind, and he looked at me and said, "Yeah, scheduling variance at end of line. Completely normal. Don't worry about logging it unless it's more than 5 minutes." I said, "Okay." He wrote something down in his own little notebook that I never got a good look at, and then he left. But I kept noticing it. And then I started noticing the other thing. Okay, so the camera setup. Let me explain it better. 4 feeds on the monitor in the break room. Camera 1 was the southbound platform. Wide angle. Covered most of it. Camera 2 was northbound. Same setup. Camera 3 was the tunnel connecting the 2 platforms, mounted up high in the middle of the pedestrian walkway, pointed south. Camera 4 was the mezzanine, pointed at the fare gates. All 4 on a split screen, each one updating every couple seconds. Not live video, or not exactly live, more like rapid stills. You'd see movement as this slightly stuttery thing, normal for that kind of system, especially older equipment, and Delworth's monitoring setup was definitely old. The flickering light I'd noticed that first night. Northbound platform. 3rd fixture. Maintenance came and replaced it sometime during day service, because by my 3rd night, it was fine. Steady. No more flickering. Good. But here's the thing. Without the flicker, I started seeing the platform better on camera 2, and I started noticing that sometimes, and again this is small, this is the kind of thing you can very easily explain away. The shadows at the far south end of the northbound platform looked a little uneven, like the light distribution was off, like one of the other fixtures at that end was dimmer than it should be. I checked it in person twice during my facility walk, and it looked fine. Perfectly lit. Same as everywhere else. But on camera it looked off. Every night. Just the south end of northbound. Just this slight unevenness in the shadows. I logged it both times I checked it. Wrote that the lighting appeared normal upon direct inspection, but that camera feed showed possible variance. Delgado read that in the log during his next check-in, and he just kind of nodded and said, "Camera positioning can cause shadow distortion. Angle of the lens versus angle of the fixture. It's a documented issue on these older installations." He said it like he'd said it before, like maybe to someone else. Or maybe to himself. I said, "All right, makes sense." He said, "You're logging thoroughly. That's good. Keep doing that." I don't know why that felt like more than a compliment, but it did. It felt like instruction. Around day 10, day 11, something like that, I had my first weird night with the train. The 142 came in, same as always. I was on the southbound platform doing my pre-lockdown check while it was still boarding on the other side, and I could hear it. That particular sound a subway train makes when it's sitting at the platform. This low electrical hum that's underneath the mechanical noise, a kind of pressure in the air. Doors open, wait, doors close. And then it didn't move. I mean, it moved, eventually. But there was a pause. I want to say 30, maybe 40 seconds, where the doors were closed and the train just sat there. And that's not nothing. Okay, that happens. Could be a signal issue. Could be the conductor waiting on a clearance. 100 different normal reasons. But I was standing there on the southbound platform, and I couldn't see the northbound directly. There's a dividing structure between them. I could just hear it. And during those 30 or 40 seconds, I had this very specific feeling of being looked at. Not by a person. I don't mean that. It just felt like the whole place was paying attention to me. Like the whole structure was oriented toward me in some way that I couldn't see, but could feel in my back and my neck. Train left. I went and did the sweep. Platform clear, tunnel clear. Logged the departure at 1:44. Went upstairs. I sat in the break room, and I thought about calling Delgado. Not because anything had actually happened, but just because that feeling was sitting on me heavy, and I wanted to hear another person's voice. I had his direct number in my phone. He'd given it to me the first night. I sat there for a while, and then I thought about the $17.50 an hour and the rent on the Clement place, and I didn't call. 2 nights after that, the train was late. Actually late. Not the usual variance, not a minute and a half. I logged the inbound arrival at 1:47, which was 5 minutes behind, and it sat at the platform longer than usual. I could tell from camera 2. I was up in the break room by then, watching the feeds, because I'd already done my pre-lockdown check. I could see it sitting there, just this gray tube filling the left side of the northbound camera frame. Doors opened. A couple of people got off. The usual skeleton crew of late riders. I watched them come up through the mezzanine camera. 4 of them. Old guy, young woman with a tote bag. 2 guys who looked like they'd just gotten off a later shift somewhere. They went through the gates and up the stairs, and that was it. Then the doors closed, and I watched the southbound camera, waiting for it to clear the frame. You can usually see the tail end of the train on camera 1 as it leaves. Little red running lights. Then nothing. I waited. I watched camera 2. The train was still there. I watched camera 1. Nothing. Back to 2. Still there. I checked the time. 1:53. 11 minutes since the scheduled departure. I'm watching the camera and the train is just sitting there with its lights on. Nobody on the platform that I can see. Nobody visible through the train windows, which are these small lit rectangles in the gray of the car bodies. Just sitting. I thought about that line in the handbook. Should the 1:42 departure be delayed for any reason, do not approach the train. Contact your supervisor. I called Delgado. He picked up on the second ring, which surprised me. I half expected voicemail. He said, "Yeah." Not hello. Just yeah. I told him the 142 was still at the platform. Said it had been sitting for about 12 minutes now. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Is the platform otherwise clear?" I said, yeah, I'd done the sweep already. Nobody on the platform. He said, stay in the operations room. Don't go down. Log the time you called me and log the time of the delayed departure when it occurs. I'll handle the notification on my end. I said, okay, but I also asked, and I don't know why I asked this, just came out I asked, is this normal? Another pause, shorter. He said, it's a documented variance. Stay in the room and log it. I said, yeah, okay. He hung up. I watched camera 2. 156, the train was still there. 158, still there. 159. I was eating a granola bar, and I'd stopped chewing. 201. And then at 202, I watched the taillights slide out of frame, and the platform was empty. I logged it. Departure confirmed at 2:02 a.m. Delay of 20 minutes from scheduled departure. Supervisor Delgado notified at 1:54 a.m. Platform confirmed clear. I sat back in that duct-taped folding chair, and I finished the granola bar, and I stared at the 4 empty camera feeds for a long time. Nothing else happened that night. Or if it did, I didn't see it. But here's where it started adding up. Because from that point on, and this is what I mean about things building slow, nothing's dramatic. None of it's a big moment. It's just this accumulation of small stuff. From that point on, there were things I started keeping track of in my own head that I wasn't logging in the official book. Just small observations. Things I noticed. I kept them on my phone, in the Notes app, just for myself. Thing 1. The southernmost end of the northbound platform, the end with the shadow issue on camera. The floor down there was always a little cleaner than the rest of the platform. Not cleaned by me. I hadn't mopped down there because it didn't need it. It was just less gritty. Less of that fine gray subway grit you get everywhere in those stations. Like that end of the platform got less traffic than the rest, which would make sense. Passengers tend to cluster toward the middle and the northern stairs. But it was cleaner than I'd expect, even for low traffic, like something was keeping it that way. Thing 2, the payphone. Okay, so there was a payphone on the northbound platform. Yeah, still a payphone, I know. This is a city transit system. They keep things forever. It was mounted on the wall just north of the midpoint. Cracked yellow housing. Receiver hanging on the hook. Out of service. I checked it my first week out of curiosity and got nothing. No dial tone. Line was dead. But around day 12, 13, I walked past it during my facility check, and the receiver was not on the hook. It was hanging, like someone had picked it up and let it dangle. Cord swinging a little when I got close. Or maybe I imagined the swinging. I honestly don't know. I put it back on the hook, logged it as equipment found displaced. Possible vandalism, though station was secured. Next night, it was on the hook. 2 nights later, off the hook again. I put it back. Didn't call it vandalism the second time. Just logged it as equipment check. Receiver repositioned. I didn't want to write what I was actually thinking, which was that nobody had been down there. I was the only person in that station. Thing 3. This is the one I go back to the most. I was doing my 3 a.m. facility walk, which I'd added to my routine on my own. The handbook only required 1 post-lockdown walk, but I was doing 2 because it gave me something to do, and because I'd started feeling like I needed to keep checking that everything was the way I'd left it. I'm on the southbound platform. I've got my flashlight, because I always brought one, even though the platform stayed lit, and I'm walking the length of it. And I get to the south end, the end closest to where the tunnel opens up, where the train comes in from. And I notice something on the yellow warning strip at the platform edge. You know, those yellow tactile strips they put at the edge of subway platforms for the visually impaired. The bumpy ones. There was something on it. At the south end of the platform, just this one spot. There was a scuff, like a mark. A transfer of something dark. Could have been grease, could have been rubber. about the size and rough shape you'd get from a shoe sole. One footprint, essentially, pointing toward the track. Now I know what you're thinking. Could have been there for months. Could have been from a maintenance worker during day service. Could have been anything. And yeah, maybe. But here's what I kept thinking about. Those marks dry out and get walked over and scattered pretty quick on a busy platform. And this was the south end of northbound, the low traffic end, the clean end. And I'd walked that exact strip 2 nights in a row and not noticed anything there. I stood there looking at it for probably a full minute. Then I looked at the track. Just darkness down the line where it curved out of sight. The rails were those cold, steady lines in the flashlight beam, and the dark beyond them was just dark. And there was nothing there. And I told myself there was nothing there. I went back upstairs. I did not log the scuff mark. I'm not totally sure why. Part of me thinks I just didn't want to write it down, because writing it down would make it a real thing I'd have to deal with. Part of me thinks I was starting, somewhere underneath the part of my brain that was still being professional and methodical, to understand that there were things in that station that the handbook's careful language was designed to go around, rather than address directly. And if I put it in the log, someone would read it, and whatever response I got would be the same kind of smooth, careful nothing that Delgado gave me every time I got close to asking the right question. Documented variance. Stay in the room. Log it. I started looking at the handbook differently after that. Reading it again. Slower this time. Not looking for instructions. Looking for shape. Looking at what it didn't say. The more I read it, the more it felt like it was trying real hard not to say something. You can feel where the words are working around something. Where the language gets just a little too specific. Too careful. Too prepared for a situation that a normal transit station handbook shouldn't need to be prepared for. Like the section on the post-lockdown window. The way it described the period between last departure and first morning service. It called it the operational rest period, which is a fine phrase. Normal enough. But it used that phrase 6 times in 12 pages. 6 times. Every time it was about to describe a protocol, it started with during the operational rest period, as if constantly reminding you what to call it was important. Like they really wanted everyone to think it was just another normal part of the shift. Or the part about the supervisory contact protocol, the section that told you to call Delgado if you observed anything outside of normal parameters. The phrase it used was outside of normal parameters. Not something wrong, not something broken. Outside of normal parameters, which is a phrase that technically covers anything. Because what are the normal parameters? The handbook didn't fully say. It implied them, it sketched them. But it never actually defined what normal looked like at Delworth Street between 2 and 5 in the morning. I sat on all of this. I kept doing my job. I kept logging. I kept the parallel notes on my phone. And I watched that south end of the northbound platform on camera every single night. And every single night, the shadows down there were wrong in that same small way. Like something was just slightly thicker there than the light should have allowed. I told myself it was the camera angle, lens distortion, old equipment. I told myself that right up until the night the 142 came in and didn't leave at all. That night started different. Not different in a way I can point to clean and say, here, this is the thing. This is where it changed. More like the difference you feel in the air before it rains. That pressure thing. I'd been feeling versions of it since week 1, but this was heavier. I noticed it coming down the entrance stairs at 11, which sounds crazy because nothing had happened yet. I hadn't even gotten to the platform. But the station had this quality to it that night that I can only describe as waiting. Like I walked in on something that had already been there for a while, I did my opening check. Everything looks normal. Wrote my 11 p.m. log entry. Sat in the break room and ate the first half of my dinner, and watched the camera feeds, and thought about whether I should ask Delgado straight up about the payphone. I'd been going back and forth on that for 3 or 4 days. Part of me wanted to see his face when I asked. Part of me was scared of what his face would do. 12 passengers on the last 2 trains before the 142. I counted them on the cameras. Gave me something to do. Old habit. 12 people out late. Going wherever people go at that hour. Home from second jobs or bars or hospitals or just wherever life had them that night. I watched all 12 of them come through the mezzanine camera and head up the stairs, and that was it. Station mine. The 142 inbound arrived at 143. 1 minute late. Right in the variance window. Doors opened. I watched on camera too. 3 people got off. Young woman, moved fast. Had her bag already on her shoulder before the doors were fully open, used to this regular late rider. 2 guys together, talking, not in a hurry. I watched all 3 come through the mezzanine and out the gates. Logged it. Routine. Doors closed. Train didn't move. I looked at the clock on the wall. 1:45. I looked back at camera 2. Train still there. 1:46. I was already reaching for my phone before I'd fully decided to. Pulling up Delgado's number. My thumb was on the screen. And then I stopped. Because I thought about the last time. I thought about how his voice sounded when I called him about the 20-minute delay. That specific flatness. Like he was reading from a card. Like he'd answered this question before, and the answer was already prepared, and the preparation was not for my benefit. I put the phone down. 1:47. Train still there. Now look, I want to be honest about what was going on in my head, because I think this is the part where if you're listening to this, you're going to think I was an idiot. And maybe I was. But understand, I was also 3 weeks into a job I needed. I was also a person who had spent a month and a half watching his savings drain into nothing. I was also someone who had been very carefully trained over 3 weeks of close reading and Delgado's measured non-answers to stay in the room and log it. I was conditioned. That's not an excuse. That's just what had happened to me in that place. 1:49. I was standing now, standing in the break room looking at the monitor. Camera 2 showed the train, just sitting there. Camera 1, southbound platform, empty. Camera 3, the tunnel, empty. Camera 4, mezzanine, empty. 1:51. I wrote in the log, 142 service delayed. Train at platform as of 1:51. Supervisor notification pending. I picked up my phone again and I stood there holding it, and I looked at the camera feeds. And that's when I saw it. Camera 2. Northbound platform, south end. There was something there. I want to be careful here because I've thought about this 1,000 times, and I don't want to oversell it or make it bigger than what it actually looked like in that moment. It wasn't a shape. It wasn't a figure. It was more like, you know how on old security camera footage, if something moves, there's sometimes this blurring, this slight smearing of pixels where the motion happened, like the camera can't quite keep up with it. It was like that. But nothing was moving, or nothing was moving that I could see. The south end of the northbound platform was just slightly wrong, in the same way it had been slightly wrong every night for 3 weeks, but more. Closer to the edge than before. The irregular shadow, the visual noise, whatever it was nearer to the center of the platform than it had been, nearer to the train. I called Delgado. It rang 4 times. Voicemail. I stood there with my phone to my ear listening to his outgoing message, which was just his name and a beep. No, please leave a message. Nothing friendly. Just Raymond Delgado and the beep. I didn't leave one. I hung up and tried again. 4 rings. Voicemail. Now the handbook said intercom or direct number. I'd always used the number. I'd never used the intercom. The intercom box was in the break room. This old wall-mounted unit with a push-to-talk button and a small speaker. And there was a laminated card next to it with a number that I was pretty sure routed to the Transit Authority's overnight operations center. I had no idea who answered that or what they'd do with anything I told them. I looked at camera 2. The thing, the smear, the wrongness, it was still there. Still near the south end of the platform. I pressed the intercom button and said I was the night attendant at Delworth Street, and I had a delayed departure on the northbound platform, and I needed supervisor contact, and could someone reach Raymond Delgado? A woman's voice came back, a little crackly, sounded tired, said she'd pass it along and asked if there was any immediate safety concern. I thought about that for a second. I said I wasn't sure. She said she'd flag it for a supervisor, and someone would be in touch and to call 911 if I observed an immediate safety concern. I said, okay. She clicked off. I put my hand on the break room door handle and I stood there. The handbook was in my bag. I'd stopped keeping it on the table after the first week, but I knew what it said. I could recite the section on this by now. Do not approach the train while it remains at the station. Do not return to the platform to investigate monitoring anomalies during the post-lockdown window. And here's the thing about rules. Here's the thing I've thought about a lot since then. Rules are written by people who know things. And there are 2 reasons you write a rule. One reason is to protect the person reading it. The other reason is to protect something from the person reading it. And standing in that break room at 1:54 in the morning, watching a train that should have been 5 miles south by now, sitting dead still on a platform in a locked station, I was no longer able to convince myself which kind of rules I'd been following. I opened the break room door and went into the mezzanine. I stood at the top of the stairs for a second. Southbound stairs, the ones that put you onto the southbound platform, not directly onto northbound. You have to go through the connecting tunnel to get there. I could hear the train, that electrical hum, the pressure of it. Still there, still live. It was running. That was the thing. Not broken down, not a dead train, not some mechanical failure. Running and sitting, which are 2 different things. I went down the stairs. Southbound platform was exactly what I'd left it. Empty. Normal. All the lights. No scuff marks on the warning strip because I'd checked it earlier in the shift. I stood there and looked toward the south end, where the tunnel mouth opened up. The black gap where the train came in from. Nothing there. Then I looked at the connecting tunnel entrance, the pedestrian walkway that went under, and came up on the northbound side. I took out my flashlight even though the tunnel is lit. I just wanted it in my hand. The connecting tunnel is maybe 60 feet long. Concrete walls, 1 light strip on each side, low ceiling. Sound bounces weird in there. I've walked through it 100 times. That night, it felt longer. Not actually longer. Just, I was aware of every step in a way I normally wasn't. I could hear my own boots. I could hear the hum of the train getting slightly louder as I came up the northbound side. I came up the stairs onto the northbound platform and stopped. The train was just there, sitting at the platform exactly like it looked on the camera. Doors closed, windows lit from inside, all the lights on. And it was empty. I could see through the windows. The car visible from where I stood was completely empty. Those plastic bench seats in that particular transit orange. Nobody on them. Nothing left behind. Just an empty lit train car. It was quiet enough that I could hear the ventilation system running inside the car. That low mechanical breath. I looked toward the south end of the platform. The shadow thing was there, and I have to say this carefully. It was not a thing with a shape. It was an absence of right. Like if you've ever been in a room where the proportions are slightly off, where the ceiling is just 6 inches lower than it should be, and you can't identify why you feel compressed, but you do. It was like that, but visible. The south end of the platform looked geometrically correct. All the right tiles, all the right fixtures. The yellow warning strip, the wall with the transit maps in their frames. All of it right. But underneath the rightness, there was something that was not right. And it was more present and more specific than anything I'd seen on the camera. I stood there for what was probably 20 seconds and felt understood, is what I felt. Not watched in the way you feel watched by a person. Understood. Like whatever was at the end of that platform had a complete picture of me, and had had a complete picture of me for 3 weeks, and had been waiting to be patient enough for me to come down here and be in the same room with it. That was when my phone buzzed. Delgado, I answered it. I didn't say anything. I think I was worried about how my voice would sound. He said, "You called." I said, "Yeah." I said, "The train's still here." He said, "I know." Then he said, "Where are you right now?" I said I was on the platform. There was a silence that had a specific texture to it. Not angry, not scared. More like a person doing a calculation in their head. Then he said, very flat, "You need to go back upstairs right now. Go to the break room, lock the door. There's a lock on the inside of that door. I need you to use it, and I need you to not open it until I tell you to." I said there was a lock on that door? He said yes. Slide bolt, top of the door frame. You probably never looked up. I said, "What is at the south end of this platform?" Another silence. Longer. And this is the part I keep coming back to. This is the moment that changed the whole shape of everything I'd been experiencing there. Because he didn't say, "What do you mean?" Or "There's nothing there," or "It's camera distortion," or "documented variance." He didn't do any of the things he'd been doing for 3 weeks. He just said, quietly, like he was trying not to be heard by something, "I need you to not look at it. Go upstairs now. Don't look at it, and don't talk to it, and don't engage with it in any way. Walk to the tunnel, keep your eyes forward, and go upstairs. Don't talk to it." He said, "Don't talk to it." I said, "What is it?" He said, "Please." And that's the word that moved me. Not an order, not a procedure, not a protocol. Please. Which was the first human thing Raymond Delgado had said to me in 3 weeks of careful managed blankness. Please meant he was scared. Please meant it was real. Please meant a lot of things that all landed on me at once. I started walking toward the tunnel. I kept my eyes forward. I could feel the south end of the platform in my peripheral vision, and I kept my eyes straight ahead. And I walked at a normal pace, because I didn't want to run. I didn't know why I didn't want to run. But some part of me understood that running would be a different kind of engagement, and I didn't want that either. The temperature dropped when I got to about the midpoint of the platform. Not a draft, not a vent, just cold, the way the inside of a walk-in cooler is cold, a steady, sustained cold that your body reads as wrong. I kept walking. I heard something. Behind me. Or not exactly behind me. More like to the side of behind me. Toward the south end. And it wasn't a sound I can fully describe, and I've tried many times. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't mechanical. It was somewhere in between. Like if you took the sound of the train's electrical hum, and you stretched it and gave it intent. That's not right either. But it's the closest I can get. It had intent. The sound had intent in it, the way a sentence has intent in it. Like it was aimed. Like it was aimed at me, specifically. I got to the tunnel entrance and went down the stairs, and I didn't look back. I went through the tunnel, and I came up on the southbound side, and I went upstairs, and I went into the break room, and I found the slide bolt at the top of the door frame. Old brass thing. Probably been there for years. Probably the whole time. And I threw it across. I stood with my back against that door for a while. My heart was doing something my heart doesn't usually do. I'm not a guy who gets rattled easy, you know me. I'm not dramatic about stuff. I was rattled. Delgado was still on the phone. I'd kept it pressed to my ear the whole time without realizing it. I said, "I'm in the room." He said, "Good." He said, "Stay there." He said, "I'm on my way." I said, "How long?" He said, 40 minutes maybe. I said, "Okay." I looked at the monitor. Camera 1, camera 3, camera 4. All empty and normal. Camera 2, northbound platform. The train was still there. And the south end of the platform, in the camera feed, the shadow or wrongness or whatever you want to call it, it was no longer at the south end. It was in the middle of the platform now, closer to the stairs. I watched it and didn't say anything to Delgado. I just watched it. The train sat at that platform for the rest of the night. Didn't move. Lights stayed on. Delgado arrived at 2:40. I heard him on the intercom and let him in through the gate. He came upstairs and he looked at the monitor, and his face did something I'd never seen his face do. He looked tired. Not shift tired. Tired in a different way. Like a person who has been holding something up for a long time and both knows they can't put it down and can no longer quite remember not carrying it. He sat down in the folding chair that wasn't the duct-taped one, and he put his hands on his knees and he looked at the floor. I said, "You knew about this." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "There's things about this station I should have told you better." I said, "Yeah." And we sat there in that locked break room, and outside in the monitor, the train sat on the platform, and the shadow waited in the middle of it. And somewhere below us, the station breathed its wet paper smell up through the vents. And I thought about the 12 people I'd counted going home. And I thought about the payphone, with the deadline, and the receiver that kept coming off the hook. And I thought about all the careful hollow language in that binder that I'd read twice, looking for the shape of what it wasn't saying. I looked at Delgado. He was still looking at the floor. I said, "How many people have worked this shift?" He looked up at me, and for just a second, his face was completely open. Just a regular tired person with something bad on his conscience. Then it closed back up. Not cold, not the managed blankness from before, just resigned. The face of someone deciding how much to say. He said, "You're the fourth one this year. Fourth one this year." I just let that sit there for a second. Didn't say anything. Sometimes when somebody tells you something that big, you need to let it take up its actual amount of space before you respond to it. Otherwise, you're just making noise over the top of it, and you miss what it actually weighs. Fourth one this year. It was October when I started. So we're talking 10 months, give or take. 4 people in a job that was supposed to be one continuous position, which means the previous 3 either quit or got let go, or something else. And from the way Delgado was sitting there looking at his hands, from the way he'd said it with that specific tired flatness, I was already pretty sure it wasn't quit or let go. I said, "What happened to them?" He didn't answer right away. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a pack of cigarettes, which surprised me because I'd never seen him smoke. And also, you absolutely cannot smoke in a transit station. There are signs about it everywhere. He tapped one out and put it between his lips and didn't light it. Just held it there. Like the ritual of it was what he needed. He said, "First one left his post. Went down to the platform during the window and didn't come back up. We found his stuff in the break room. Keys, logbook, his jacket. No sign of him anywhere in the station." I said, "Anywhere in the station." He said, "Or anywhere else." I let that sit too. He said the second one called it in. like I did. Called the intercom line, said something was wrong with the platform. Said she could see something on the cameras. Operations center dispatched a supervisor. Took about 50 minutes to get there. By the time anyone arrived, she was gone. Same thing. Belongings in the break room. Station locked from the inside. Nobody there. The third one. He stopped. Turned the unlit cigarette in his fingers. He said the third one lasted 6 weeks. Longer than anyone. He said that one read the handbook closely and followed every protocol and logged everything correctly and did everything right. And one night in late July, the train didn't leave. And in the morning, when day staff arrived, the break room door was locked from the inside and the slide bolt was thrown. And they had to take the door off the hinges and there was nobody in there. I said, the bolt was thrown from the inside. He said, yeah. I sat with that one for a long time. Now look, I want to tell you what was going on in my head because it matters. Yeah, I was scared. Anybody would have been. But once Delgado told me what had happened to the others, something else settled in too. I finally stopped trying to explain everything away. Whatever was happening in that station was real. I didn't understand it. Hell, I still don't. But at least I wasn't lying to myself anymore. Weird as it sounds, that part almost felt like a relief. I said, "Why didn't you tell me any of this when you hired me?" Delgado put the unlit cigarette back in the pack, put the pack back in his pocket. He said, "Protocol." I said, "Protocol." He said, "There are people above me on this. People who determine what station staff are told during onboarding. I don't make those decisions." I said, "So the protocol is to hire somebody, give them a handbook that tells them not to look at things, and hope they don't disappear." He didn't argue with that. He said, "The protocol is to maintain continuous overnight staffing at this station. The reasons for that, the reason the station needs to be staffed overnight, that information is above my level too." I said, "You don't know why you need someone here." He said, "I know it needs to be staffed. I know that when it isn't staffed, things happen with the morning service that are difficult to explain. Schedule disruptions, equipment issues." He paused. He said, "Twice in the past 2 years when the overnight position went unfilled for more than 3 consecutive nights. 2 separate morning trains reported, and this is in the official incident logs, reported the sensation of obstruction on the line between Delworth and the next station north. No physical obstruction found. Both times service on that segment was suspended for 6 hours while they checked the tracks. Nothing there." I said, "Sensation of obstruction. How does a train report a sensation?" He said, The conductors reported it. Said it felt like the line was occupied, that something was on the track, even though nothing was there." I looked at the monitor. Camera 2. The train still at the platform, the middle of the platform. I looked at where the shadow thing had been when Delgado arrived. It was still there, roughly, near the middle. Maybe slightly further north than before. Hard to tell exactly on that camera. I said, "Is it getting closer to the stairs?" Delgado looked at the monitor. His jaw tightened. He said, "Let's talk about what you're going to do." I said, "I'm going to do what the 3 people before me should have been told they could do, which is leave." He said, "I understand that, and I want to be straight with you. I am not in a position to stop you from leaving. You can walk out of here right now, but I need you to understand something about that." I said, "What?" He said, "The other 2 who left the platform and disappeared. They weren't on the platform when it happened. Based on what we can reconstruct from the logs and the camera timestamps, they were in transit. One of them was in the mezzanine. One was in the connecting tunnel." I felt something cold move through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. I said, "They were trying to leave." He said, "They were in between places when it happened. And I don't know. I genuinely do not know whether that was coincidence or whether moving through the station during the active window is more dangerous than staying still. I don't know. What I know is that the one who stayed locked in the break room, the third one, whatever happened to her, happened with the door locked from the inside. So staying in here doesn't guarantee anything either. I'm not going to pretend it does. I said, "Then what does?" He said, "Getting to morning. Getting to 5:15 a.m. when the first service run comes through. Every documented incident has resolved by that point. The train leaves. The station goes back to normal. Day staff comes in. Whatever it is, and I cannot tell you what it is, it has a window, and the window closes at 5:15. I looked at the clock on the break room wall. It was 2:58 a.m., which meant 2 hours and 17 minutes until 5:15. 2 hours and 17 minutes in a locked room, watching cameras while something moved up a platform toward the stairs that led to where I was sitting. I said, "Has it ever come up the stairs?" Delgado was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Not that we have documentation of." I said, "That's a very specific way to say no." He said, "Yes, it is." I stood up. I couldn't sit anymore. I stood and paced the small length of the break room and thought about every choice I had in front of me. I could stay. I could try to leave and risk being in transit when something happened, which apparently was the worst possible place to be. I could call 911, which would bring people into the station during the window, and whatever happened to them would be on me. I could try to get Delgado to explain more, but I was increasingly understanding that Delgado's level of knowledge, while more than mine, was also carefully bounded. He was another layer of managed information. He knew more than the handbook. Someone above him knew more than he did. And so on. The thing at the bottom of that chain of knowing, the actual truth of what was in that station. I wasn't sure anyone sitting in an office building with their name on a door actually had it. I said, "Tell me everything you know. Not protocol, not what you're supposed to say. Everything you actually know." He looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded, like something in him had been waiting for someone to ask it that way. He said, "It's been in the station for at least 30 years, maybe longer. The documentation we have goes back to 1991, but there are incident reports in the older physical archives that suggest it predates that. It seems tied to the station itself, not the line, because they rerouted a segment in 2003 and changed the platform configuration, and it didn't move. It was still here when service resumed. It's not aggressive in the way people expect when I describe it. It doesn't chase. It doesn't attack. It moves slowly during the window, and then it stops moving before morning service. What it does to people, the ones who disappear, we don't know. There are no bodies. There are no traces. They are simply gone in a way that has no mechanism we can identify. I said, and the station keeps it here. Staffing the station keeps it contained. He said, "That's the operational theory." "Yeah." I said, "Whose theory?" He said, "People above my pay grade. That's genuinely all I know about that." I said, "And you keep hiring people to sit in this station overnight knowing they might disappear." He put his hands on his knees again and looked at the floor again and said, "I've been trying to find ways to make it safer." The bolt on the door, that was me. That wasn't in the original setup. The second camera on the northbound platform, the angle change on the south end, that was me too. I'm trying to give people more warning, more time. He stopped. He said, "It's not enough. I know it's not enough. But I don't have the authority to shut this station down, and I don't have the authority to stop the staffing requirement. And I can't go to the people who do have that authority because every time I've tried to escalate this through proper channels, the response I get is that the staffing requirement stands, and my job is to fulfill it. I said, and if you stop fulfilling it. He said, then someone above me fulfills it differently. And the differently, from what I've been able to understand, doesn't involve telling people what I've just told you. At least I tell people. At least I try. He said that last part quietly, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. I sat back down. I looked at the camera feeds, the train on the platform, the thing in the middle of the northbound platform, maybe slightly further north than before, hard to tell. The camera wasn't perfect. Camera 3, the tunnel, empty. Camera 4, mezzanine, empty. I thought about the people on the monitor earlier that night. The 12 people I'd counted going home. The woman with the bag on her shoulder before the doors fully opened. Used to it. Got places to be. The 2 guys talking. Normal people on their normal night. Not knowing what the station became after they left. I said, does it ever go near the passengers? During service hours. Delgado said, no. That's consistent across all the documentation. It's only active after the last departure. During service hours, there's no anomaly. Nothing. It's just a station. I said, so it knows. He said, that would be one interpretation. I said, what's another interpretation? He didn't answer that. We sat there for a while, not talking. I checked my phone. No signal, which I'd known since week 1. The station's underground, and the transit authority didn't bother with a cell repeater. The break room Wi-Fi was transit authority network, and I didn't have the password. I was connected to nothing outside of this room, and the person sitting across from me, who had just told me he'd been feeding people into this station one by one, and watching them disappear. I was angry, not just because he'd kept things from me, because every night I'd walked into that station thinking I knew the job. I didn't. The handbook, the careful wording, all of it was there to keep people like me from asking the right questions, until it was too late. Delgado was part of that, whether he wanted to be or not. But when I looked at him, I didn't see a monster. I saw a tired guy who'd been carrying something he couldn't fix for a long time. That didn't make any of this okay. Not even close. But for the first time, I understood he was trapped in this place too. Just in a different way. That doesn't make it okay. I'm just telling you what I saw. I looked at the monitor at 3:22 a.m., and the thing was at the north end of the platform now. I could see it clearly on camera too. The visual wrongness concentrated near the platform stairs. The stairs that led up to the mezzanine. The mezzanine that was one set of stairs away from the break room. I said, it's at the stairs. Delgado leaned forward and looked at the monitor. His face did the tightening thing again. He said, okay. He said it like he was saying it to himself. I said, has it ever come this far before? He said, I've never been in the station during the window before. I'm going off documentation. I said, so you don't know? He said, I don't know. I looked at camera 4, the mezzanine camera, empty. Fare gates, turnstiles, the token booth with my logbook on the counter. All of it normal. All of it just a subway station mezzanine at 3 in the morning. Then camera 4 flickered. Not like a light flickering. The image itself. Like a single frame drop. Like the camera skipped. And in that fraction of a second, the mezzanine looked different. I can't tell you how. By the time I registered it, it was already back to normal. But the mezzanine had, for one frame, looked different. And my body knew it before my brain caught up, because I was already on my feet and backed against the far wall of the break room before I understood why I'd moved. Delgado was standing too. He'd seen it. We looked at each other. He said very quietly, "Stay away from the door." I said, "I thought it doesn't come up the stairs." He said, "I said there's no documentation of it." That's not the same thing. The break room was silent except for the fluorescent hum, and both of us breathing. and the faint sound of something I could not immediately identify coming from the direction of the door. Not a knock, not a scratch. More like the sound of pressure. Like the air on the other side of the door had a different weight than the air on this side, and the door was registering that difference. I looked at the slide bolt, still thrown, still across. The clock on the wall said 3:31 a.m. 1 hour and 44 minutes until 5:15. 1 hour and 44 minutes. I kept looking at that clock, like if I looked at it enough times, the numbers would move faster. They didn't. They never do when you need them to. That's the thing about waiting when you're scared. Time doesn't compress. It does the opposite. It stretches out and gets thick. And every minute has this terrible weight to it that normal minutes don't have. I was aware of every second in that room in a way I've never been aware of time before or since. The pressure sound at the door kept going. Not constant. It would be there for 30, 40 seconds, and then stop. And the stopping was almost worse than the sound, because in the silence, I'd find myself waiting for it to come back. And that anticipation was its own kind of awful. Delgado was standing near the monitor, not right next to me. We'd kind of naturally gone to opposite sides of the small room, without discussing it. I don't know why. Maybe it felt safer to cover more of the space. Maybe we just both needed to not be standing directly next to another person while that was happening outside the door. I said, keeping my voice low, without fully deciding to, "Does it know we're in here?" Delgado said, "I think it knows everything that's in the station." I said, "That's not comforting." He said, "I know." I watched camera 4 on the monitor. Mezzanine still looked normal, or mostly normal. There was something about the far left corner of the frame near the top of the stairs, coming up from the southbound platform. A quality. The same quality I'd been seeing on camera 2 for 3 weeks. That visual wrongness. That geometric, almost rightness. It was faint. Much fainter than what I'd seen on the platform. But it was there. I said, "It's on the mezzanine." Delgado looked at the monitor. He said, "Maybe. Could be camera artifact from the angle." I said, "You know it's not a camera artifact." He said, "Yeah." I sat down on the floor with my back against the far wall. Not the wall with the door. The opposite one. I don't know why I sat on the floor. It just felt right. Felt like the right posture for what we were doing, which was essentially just surviving 1 minute at a time in a locked room. Delgado stayed standing. He was that kind of person, I think. The kind who can't sit down when something's happening. Different coping mechanisms. My phone was in my hand, and I was looking at it even though I had no signal. Just looking at it. And I noticed my notes app was open. The parallel log I'd been keeping. All those small observations over 3 weeks. The payphone, the scuff mark, the shadow variances. The train delays logged to the minute. I scrolled through it and I thought about the 3 people before me. Whether they kept notes. Whether they had their own parallel records of the thing creeping up on them slowly enough that they could almost always explain it away. I thought about the third one especially. The one who lasted 6 weeks. The one who threw the bolt from the inside and was gone when they took the door off the hinges. 6 weeks is a long time to be paying that close attention and logging everything carefully and doing everything right. 6 weeks is a long time to hold on. I said, "The third one. The one who lasted the longest. Did she know about the others before her?" Delgado said, "No. Same onboarding as you. Handbook. Standard orientation." I said, "So she figured it out herself." He said, "Seems that way from her logs. She was thorough. Very thorough." I said, "What did her logs say at the end?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Her last entry was at 4:47 a.m., about 25 minutes before morning service." She logged that the monitoring equipment was showing significant anomaly on the northbound platform, and that she had secured the operations room and was maintaining position. Last line said, and I have read this many times, last line said, "Window almost closed. Think I've got it." I sat with that for a long time. Think I've got it. 25 minutes from the finish line. And whatever got her anyway. I said, "So being in the locked room isn't actually the answer." He said, "Being in the locked room is the best option we have documented. That's all I can tell you." I said, "Best option you have documented is still a dead end for everyone who's tried it." He said, "She's the only one who made it to nearly 5 a.m. The others didn't make it past 3. So something about the room, the door, something is buying time, even if it isn't a complete solution." I thought about that. Buying time. For what, though? Buying time until the window closes at 5:15, which she almost made. 25 minutes short. I looked at the clock. 3:44 a.m. An hour and 31 minutes to go. The pressure sound came back at the door. Longer this time. Maybe a full minute of it. And there was something new in it. Or something I was hearing more clearly now that I'd been listening to it for a while. It was almost rhythmic. Not mechanical rhythmic. Not like a machine. Biological rhythmic. Like breathing. Like something with a respiratory cycle was pressed against the outside of that door. I said to Delgado, "I need you to tell me something true right now." He looked at me. I said, "If we both make it to 5:15, if the window closes and morning service comes through, and day staff arrives and we walk out of here, what happens then? Do I just come back tomorrow night? Does the position stay open? Does any of this change?" He didn't answer immediately. He picked up the cigarette pack again, tapped it against his palm. "Put it back." He said, "The position has a staffing requirement. That requirement comes from above my level. When I've tried to challenge it, I've been told it's non-negotiable on operational grounds." I said, "So yes, nothing changes." He said, "For the position, no. For you specifically, that's your choice. Nobody can make you come back." I said, "And if I don't come back, you hire somebody else." He said, "I would be required to fill the position, yes." I said, "With someone who doesn't know what's in here." He looked at the floor. He said, "Probably with less information than you now have. Because the way the protocol works, you having this conversation with me tonight is outside of standard procedure. I'm already outside my lane here." I said, "You told me because you thought I was going to die tonight." He said, "I told you because you went down to that platform and came back up and you asked me directly, and you deserved a straight answer." He said it quietly, not defensive, just tired and straight. I said, "You're a complicated person, Delgado." He said, "Yeah." The clock moved to 4:02, an hour and 13 minutes. Nothing dramatic happened between 3:44 and about 4:15. I want to be honest about that. The pressure sound came and went. The mezzanine camera showed its faint wrongness in the corner that sometimes seemed more pronounced and sometimes less. And I stopped trying to track it precisely because it was making me more scared rather than more informed. I ate the rest of my dinner that I'd brought, the second half of a sandwich that I'd been too keyed up to finish earlier. Delgado watched me eat with a look on his face that I think was something like respect, or maybe just recognition. Like, "Yeah, you eat when you can. That's right. That's the move." I offered him half and he shook his head. I thought about my sister's text, about my mom's phone bill. I thought about the Clement apartment and the neighbor upstairs, and the radiator noise and how that radiator noise at 3 a.m. had always annoyed me, and how right now I would have given a significant amount to be lying in my bed, listening to it. I thought about Ronnie Carver and the HVAC job, and how getting laid off from that job had set this whole chain in motion. Funny how that works. Funny how the whole architecture of how you ended up somewhere can be traced back to one thing that seemed at the time like just bad luck. At 4:15, the break room light went out. Not flickered. Off. Completely off. No warning, no flicker first, just on and then not on. And we were in the dark with the monitor as the only light source, the 4 gray camera feeds throwing this pale glow that lit Delgado's face from below and didn't reach the corners of the room. I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "Is there a breaker?" Delgado said, "Breaker panel is in the utility room off the mezzanine." I said, "So we can't get to it?" He said, "No." I said, "Okay." We stayed in the monitor glow. I pulled out my flashlight and turned it on, and it helped, but not as much as I wanted it to. Flashlights in small, dark rooms create their own shadows, and the shadows moved when I moved, and I didn't love that. Camera 2 showed the northbound platform. The train was still there, had been there for over 2.5 hours now. And the thing, I could see it more clearly somehow in the monitor light in the darkroom. Or I was seeing it more clearly because I was looking harder. It was no longer on the platform. Camera 2 showed an empty platform. The train. No wrongness visible. Camera 4 showed the mezzanine. The thing was at the door to the break room. I could see it on camera 4 because camera 4 covered part of the mezzanine, including the break room door from the outside. And it was there, right outside the door. The visual wrongness that I'd been watching migrate for hours. From the south end of the platform, to the middle, to the stairs, to the mezzanine corner, to outside this door. It was right there on the other side of 4 inches of door, and a brass slide bolt. The breathing sound was very clear now. I looked at the bolt, still thrown, still across. Delgado saw it too. He said, "Don't touch the door." I said, "I wasn't planning to." He said, "Whatever it's doing, it's been this close before." To the third one. "She made it to 447 with it at the door." I said, 30 minutes from now it'll be 447. He said, "I know." I said, "And she didn't make it through the next 25 minutes. He said, "You're not her." Different situation. 2 of us in here. I said, "You think that matters?" He didn't answer. The bolt. I kept watching the bolt in my flashlight beam. Just that small piece of brass hardware between 2 fixed points, the door and the frame. It was not moving. It was perfectly still. And then at 421, it moved. Not far. Not thrown open. Just shifted. Maybe a 1/4 inch. Toward the open position. I was across the room and had my hand on it before I'd taken a breath. Pushed it back. Held it. Looked at Delgado, and he was already moving toward me, and he put his hand over mine on the bolt, and we both held it. Nothing pushed back. That was the thing that made it worse. There was no force on the other side. The bolt had just moved on its own, and now there was no force, and we were both standing there holding a bolt against nothing. But we didn't let go. We stood there holding that bolt together for I don't know how long. Long time. My arm started to ache, and I shifted my grip and Delgado shifted his, and we didn't talk. And we didn't look at each other, and we just held it. The breathing sound was right there on the other side. Close enough that if there'd been just the door, and not whatever the door represented, I'd have been able to feel the breath on my face. I thought about the third one holding this same bolt alone. I thought about how that must have felt in the last minutes, arm aching, alone in the dark, window almost closed. And then, whatever happened, happened. At some point I started talking. Not to Delgado. Not to the thing at the door. Just talking. Quietly. I talked about the HVAC job. I talked about Ronnie Carver and the Steelers cap, and the commercial builds that fell through. I talked about the Clement apartment and the upstairs neighbor and the radiator. I talked about my sister and my mom's phone bill and how I was going to pay it when I got out of here. Was just going to call and pay it. The whole thing, whatever it was. I talked about a dog I had when I was a kid. German Shepherd mix, named Truck. Best dog I've ever known. I have no idea why I talked about Truck. He just came to mind, and I started talking about him. And Delgado listened and didn't say anything. And I talked about Truck for probably 5 minutes. It helped. That's the only reason I'm telling you. It helped to have my own voice in the room saying normal things. Things that were true and had nothing to do with where I was. Like anchoring myself to a life that existed outside that room, outside that station, outside whatever was pressing against the door. 4:38. Delgado said quietly, 37 minutes. I said, yeah. The bolt hadn't moved again since the one time. We were still holding it. My arm was really aching now. I adjusted again. 4:44. I said, third one made it to 4:47. He said, you're going to make it past 4:47. I said, you don't know that. He said, no, but you are. 4:47 came and went. I noted it by not noting it. I made a decision not to watch the clock hit 4:47 because I didn't want that number to have power over me. And so I looked at the camera feeds instead. And at 4:48 I thought, okay, further than she got. And then I stopped thinking about that too. The breathing sound changed at 4:52. It had been steady for so long that I'd almost not stopped hearing it, but incorporated it. The way you incorporate the refrigerator hum or the radiator noise. And then it changed, and I heard the change immediately. It was lower, and it was slower, like something winding down rather than something advancing. I looked at camera 4. The wrongness at the door was still there, but it looked different, less concentrated, like the edges of it were less defined, like something was losing its resolution. I said, something's happening. Delgado looked at the monitor. He said nothing, but his jaw unclenched slightly. I felt it in his hand over mine on the bolt. 5:01. The breathing sound was very faint now, and then it stopped. Not gradually, not fading out. It just stopped. Same way the break room light had gone out. Present, and then not present. I didn't let go of the bolt. Camera 2, the northbound platform. The train was still there, still lit, still sitting. I watched it. I watched it, and I waited. The platform was completely clean of any visual wrongness. Clear tile, clear light, empty platform. Just a train that had been sitting in a station for 3.5 hours. 5:09, 6 minutes. I said, it's gone from the cameras. Delgado said, keep holding the bolt. 5:11. 5:13. I said, if that train doesn't leave at 5:15, I'm going to lose my mind. Delgado almost smiled. Not quite. The edge of one. He said, it'll leave. 5:15. I watched camera 2, and the train moved. The lights shifted first, that particular change in the quality of the light when something electrical goes from idle to active. And then the train moved, and I watched it slide out of the frame on camera 2, and then I watched the taillights cross camera 1, and then it was gone, and both platforms were empty, and the station was just a station. I started crying. I want to be straight about that, because I've left it out this long, and it happened, so I'm telling you. I didn't make a lot of noise about it. I just stood there with my hand on the bolt that I still hadn't let go of, and cried for about 2 minutes. Delgado stood next to me and didn't say anything, which was the right move, which was exactly what I needed. Then I wiped my face with the back of my hand, and I threw the bolt open. The mezzanine was empty. Normal. Turnstiles, fare gates, logbook on the token booth counter. First thing I saw was my logbook, sitting there exactly where I'd left it. And the banality of that, the complete normalness of a logbook on a counter, was so overwhelming after everything that I had to stop and breathe for a second. Delgado walked the mezzanine. I walked it with him. We went down to the northbound platform together. Both platforms, the tunnel, the whole station. Nothing. No trace. The south end of the northbound platform was just the south end of a subway platform. Yellow warning strip, clean tile, wall with transit maps. The payphone receiver was on the hook. The light in the third fixture was steady. We stood on the northbound platform for a while. I said, "I'm not coming back." He said, "I know." I said, "You know this has to stop." He said, "I know that too." I said, "I mean it. Whoever's above you, whoever runs the staffing requirement, this has to stop. You have to find a way to make it stop. Because the next person you put in here doesn't know. And not knowing is how people disappear." He was looking at the south end of the platform. He said, "I've been trying to stop it for a while." I said, "Try differently. Try harder. Try in a way that can't be managed and redirected and told it's non-negotiable. Make enough noise about it that the managing stops working." He said, "That's not a small ask." I said, "No, it's not. But you've watched 4 people go through this, and you sat across from me tonight, and you said please, and that means you still have enough of a conscience left to do something with. Don't waste it." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. Just once. But it was a real nod, not an institutional one. Day staff arrived at 6:50. 2 women and a man, cheerful, normal, coffee cups, talking about something that happened in a TV show, completely unaware. I watched them come down the stairs and take their positions, and it was like watching people walk into a photograph of a normal place. I wanted to say something. I didn't. I didn't know what I would have said. I walked out of Delworth Street Station at 7:03 a.m., came up the stairs into the morning, into street noise and bus exhaust, and somebody's music from a window above, and I stood on the sidewalk for a while and let all of it land on me. The smell of coffee from somewhere, a pigeon doing its specific pigeon walk along the gutter, a woman walking fast with a kid's backpack in her hand, running late, heels loud on the pavement. I never went back. I didn't call to quit, didn't send an email, just didn't show up. 2 days later, I got a call from a transit authority HR number that I let go to voicemail. Never listened to the message. Deleted it. 3 days after that, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Not Delgado's number. Different. And I didn't answer that either. I found work about 3 weeks later doing facilities maintenance for a hotel chain. Day shifts, normal building, normal hours. Pays a little less than the subway job. I don't care. I looked up Delworth Street Station a few times in the months after. Just the Transit Authority Service updates page, the one that shows delays and incidents. It kept running. Night service, day service, all of it. I looked for the overnight position posting, whether they'd put it up again. About 6 weeks after I left, I found it on the transit jobs board. Nighttime facilities and platform operations attendant. Delworth Street Station, $17.50 an hour. I stared at that posting for a long time. I thought about calling someone, a reporter, a city council office. I don't know. I thought about it. I still think about it. I haven't done it, and I don't fully know why, except that I'm aware of how this sounds when I tell it. And I'm aware that what I actually have is a personal account, and some notes on my phone, and a deeply unsatisfying answer to the question of what exactly was in that station. I don't have that answer. I never got it. The thing at the south end of the northbound platform, the thing in the break room door at 4:21 a.m., the thing that took 3 people and almost took me, I don't know what it was. I've thought about it enough times that I've run out of new ways to think about it. Some nights, I still hear it. Not a nightmare, don't think I'm saying that. Just the specific sound of it. The breathing pressure sound at the door that sometimes shows up in the space between being awake and being asleep. Some things just don't leave you. I checked the posting again about 2 months ago. Still up. Delworth Street. Night shift. $17.50 an hour. I hope whoever took it reads the handbook twice. I hope they look up. I hope Delgado told them something real. Anyway, that's the thing. That's the whole thing. I know how it sounds. I've known that since before I started telling it. But you asked. That's what happened. I needed a beer to get through it. Now, I need another one. So, if you're buying, I'll take whatever's cold.